Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, I am joined with a very special guest, Mr. David Godfrey. Welcome to the podcast, David.
Thanks so much, Ian.
Awesome. So, David is from Chase Life Consultancy, him and his wife, Rachel. How long have you been running that? 15 years plus now, David?
Chase Life itself, we launched in 2015.
Right.
So we've both been working in this field for probably 20 plus years each now. We launched Chase Life Intensive and Chase Life Consulting in 2015.
So essentially what David is emotional eating and behavior change coach. So David helps his clients resolve and fix their issues around emotional and binge eating forever. I guess that's the idea. Also an author with the book Think Straight, Lose Weight, which I've got. Yes, I love it.
Yeah.
Great book. So everybody should go out right now on Amazon and use the code Ian10. That's not real. That's not a thing. But we should get an affiliate link going on. But yeah, so today I wanted to talk a little bit to David about emotional and binge eating and the survival brain. So David's podcast, which all my clients, I say, listen, get onto the podcast because I want to cultivate what I'm trying to get across there. So the Chase Life podcast is absolutely awesome. So for those that are really interested in this field, go subscribe, listen to that. It's absolutely amazing. But I wanted to talk about the emotional eating and the survival brain. So I guess the first thing we need to maybe do is define what emotional eating is and binge eating, and whether it's even the same thing, David.
Yeah, that's a great question because it does come up a lot, and it's interesting in terms of the terminology that you use because different people would resonate with different words. But if we look at the options in terms of the labels that people can use, right, we've got binge eating, emotional eating, compulsive eating, mindless eating, grazing, snacking, or stress eating. That's another one that people will use. And from our perspective, these are all exactly the same thing. Now, yes, there's absolutely varying degrees of severity. So some people might think, oh, well, I don't binge. I just mindlessly eat. I find myself picking. And okay, maybe if you see a quote binge as being continuing to eat beyond the point of fullness and blah, blah, blah. Okay. But the crux of the issue is the same, which is you're no longer eating for a functional purpose. You're eating for emotional reasons. And so we are using food to either escape pain or move towards pleasure. And for the majority of people, most of the time, it's about escaping pain. Now, yes, absolutely, people can learn to associate pleasure with it, right? People can learn to associate comfort or feeling reassured or even love with eating. How does that happen? Well, let's say that you're a kid at school and you're being bullied or there's something upsetting happening at school. And you come home and your mum reassures you, and every single time that she reassures you, she gives you ice cream. And so you then learn to collapse those two things. You learn to create a neurological association between eating ice cream and feeling reassured. And so then later, as an adult, every time that you emotionally seek that sense of reassurance, you find yourself reaching for ice cream. Or if instead of actually reassuring you, your mum is too busy and gives you ice cream. And so now you can make this almost like misinterpretation between the craving for love and nurturing from your mum and eating ice cream. And so every time that you're craving love, you reach for ice cream, right? So people can absolutely learn to associate quotes positive or the feelings that they want more of from eating food. But like I say, the majority of the time it's about escaping pain, right? Now, when I use the word pain, yes, it can absolutely be escaping the more intense feelings like despair and hopelessness and helplessness. But it can also be the seemingly innocuous ones like boredom, apathy, or just simply confusion. You're trying to fix a work problem. You can't quite see the wood for the trees. You can't figure it out. And so you find you don't like the uncertainty of that. And so you find yourself looking to turn to food for escape. And so that's what everybody's doing. Whether you are in the kitchen preparing your kids' food and find yourself mindlessly picking at things, you're looking for something. You're looking for a feeling, or you're looking to escape a feeling that you do have. Like maybe you're just bored. Maybe you're just going through the same like day in, day out, and it kind of feels like Groundhog Day. So now you feel like you lack a sense of purpose in your life. And so now you're looking for distraction. You're looking for something to stimulate you in some new way to get out of the boredom or the Groundhog Day kind of feeling, right? So it can be just, you know, as simple and as subtle as that. But that's no different really from the person who turns to binge eating when they struggle with low self-worth and they just don't feel good enough. They've suffered some kind of huge rejection or knockback, whether it's professionally or socially or privately, and then they go and soothe themselves with food. It's the same thing. You're looking to change how you feel internally using an external vehicle. And in this instance, the vehicle is food. But it's not massively different to any other external vehicle people can use, right? Alcohol, cigarettes, shopping, gambling, Netflix, social media. People are using external vehicles to change how they feel internally. And that's fundamentally what we're looking at. And so it's all part and parcel of the same thing.
So these neural pathways, which will bring us onto the kind of the survival brain, like, are these cultivated from childhood, or can it just happen at any time? Like, as far as like building this association between like eating food and escapism?
Yeah, you can learn that response at any point in your life, but it is more common for people to learn it at a younger age, often in adolescence. I would say if I had to guess where do the majority of our clients develop these behaviors, it's often in adolescence, but it doesn't really matter. But yeah, you can learn it at any point. I mean, people can literally learn it from such an early age. And actually, we heard a terrifying statistic the other day, which was that 1 in 3 children, I forget the age, it was crazily young. It was like 5 years old or something, are obese. 1 in 3. It just blows the mind as to how much of a problem this has become. So yeah, people can learn it from as early as that. But we have people who develop it in, you know, their late 20s, early 30s, who everything's fine. So one fairly typical path that some people go on is that they don't have any issues with food, and then they get inspired, or for whatever reason they decide to go on some kind of fitness transformation, whatever that might be, right? Whether they want to get on stage or whether they want to do a photo shoot, but they take things to like a really kind of aggressive approach, having never really done anything like that before. And then all of a sudden they find themselves like with these compulsive behaviors around food afterwards. That's quite common as well. So yeah, people can learn it at any age, really.
Yeah, I tell a lot of people, like, the irony with a healthy diet is to never have to do one in the first place. And like, you often start that kind of cycle and you don't realize it's 20 years later and you've essentially dieted yourself into a worse situation, not just physically, but also mentally and emotionally. Is that something that you guys, like you mentioned there, it kind of doesn't matter when these associations were built. So it's not about looking back at the issue and almost counseling that problem. It's about moving forward, right?
So that's a great question. So there are a lot of approaches to therapy that will revolve around diving into the past, and there's absolutely a place for that. And there are definitely times when I will reference events from somebody's history and help them to change the beliefs that they developed from that, or the associations they've created from that, or just some of the coping mechanisms that have derived from that event. So there's definitely times when I will do that, but a lot of the time, what we do is about training the neural pathways that we want, instead of trying to get rid of the ones that we don't want. So for those who don't understand that term, a neural pathway is basically a sequence of nerve messages in your brain and in your nervous system. So, like learning to hit a tennis ball in tennis, you have to coordinate the muscles in the right order. Right? So if somebody's learned how to play tennis, then they know that you have to rotate the hips first before the racket comes through. Right? So you have to coordinate those muscles in that order. And if you swing the arm without rotating the hips, then it's very ineffective. You don't generate much power doing it that way. So whether you learn like the good technique, rotating your hips first, or the quote bad technique, just swinging your arm without rotating your body, either way, that's a neural pathway, right? So your brain sends those nerve messages in that order. Okay, use your leg muscles first and then use your arm muscles second, type of thing. Okay, great. That's a neural pathway. And then you just repeat that. And then that becomes ingrained, it becomes more and more and more automatic. So that's all a neural pathway is. And so our approach is to train the neural pathway somebody needs, instead of worrying about the neural pathways they don't want. So using the tennis metaphor again, let's say that you've learned a crappy technique with your forehand. I don't need to analyze that forehand, which is what a lot of people will do when they're analyzing their binge eating behaviors. The automatic question a lot of people have is, why do I do this and where did this come from? And it's all built on the belief that if I understand the problem in detail, the problem is going to go away. Well, let's apply the same analogy to learning to play tennis. Okay, why do I hit a crappy forehand? Okay, well, I was self-taught, played tennis on my own for, just hitting a ball against a wall for a few years. And then I got a coach who taught me some really, that they weren't a great coach. They taught me some bad habits. And so I don't need to like dive into and analyze why I hit a crappy forehand and where that all came from. And it started when I was 6 and blah, 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 blah. And just diving into the story and reliving the story over and over and over again. But unfortunately, that's where a lot of people's belief system is in terms of fixing a lot of their emotional or behavioral issues, is let's understand where the problem came from. Now, again, it's not to say that that is irrelevant and that there aren't times when that's appropriate. There are times when that's appropriate. But usually what we find is that on its own, even when it is appropriate, a lot of the time, even then, on its own, it's not enough. We still have to train the neural pathway that we want. And, another useful analogy is it's kind of like understanding how and why your car broke down. Well, you can understand that in vivid detail, but that doesn't mean you have the skill set to fix it. Completely different skill set. So this is the same, right? So in order to learn a good forehand in tennis, then I need to learn how to hit a great forehand. I don't need to worry about the crappy forehand. And all I do is dedicate myself on what I do want to be doing, how I do want to be moving, and do that over and over and over again. And by default, what I don't want, the crappy forehand, disappears all by itself. I don't even need to understand where it came from and why I did it. It's gone all by itself, purely as a result of installing the new neural pathway. And so it's exactly the same with binge eating, is that people have a gap in their skill sets. They have not learned how to regulate themselves internally instead of needing an external vehicle to do that. So they've got a gap in their skill set. So we simply need to teach them that. And then by default, what they don't want disappears.
So how does traditional dieting and all these tools, tactics, whether it's fasting, whether it's tracking calories, whether it's counting points, whether it's eating clean, how did these impact those binge and emotional eaters, maybe in the short term by having some kind of, it's maybe giving them some false confidence, or finally sorted this, then something happens. How are them actually contributing to the problem rather than resolving it?
Yeah, awesome. And yeah, you're absolutely right. It's such a common issue, is that people learn these diets, and whether it's something that's like more of a quote traditional diet from like the weight loss or dieting industry, like, you know, keto and counting points and, you know, intermittent fasting, or whether it's more a quote unquote fitness industry approach in terms of, you know, counting calories and tracking macros, they're all coming from a positive intention, which is, well, people need a structure, and so let's give them a system. But unfortunately, the way that these things are taught breeds perfectionism. They amplify the all or nothing mindset. People start seeing food as being good food and bad food, which then escalates into seeing a meal as a good meal or a bad meal, which escalates into seeing the day as being a good day or a bad day, which even can escalate into seeing themselves as being good or bad, depending on whether they're able to stick to it or not. And if you get trapped into that mentality, then you get very easily trapped into perfectionism, which is, I'm either following the rules or I'm not. I'm either following this diet, or I'm either following sticking to the calories, or I'm not. And if I'm not, I'm going to fail anyway. So what's the point in even trying? So then if you happen to be having a quote imperfect day, or you happen to be out of your regular routine, you're traveling, you're visiting your mum, you're sick, and your appetite's all over the place, just something is different to your perfectly organized, controlled environment where you've got all of your ducks perfectly in a row. Anything outside of perfect, and you think, screw it, what's the point in even trying? And you quote unquote throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so that's one of the big ways that these like typical diets and fitness nutrition approaches will often make things worse. But there are others as well. Another one is, two of the ones that I teach people on are how it creates disconnects between your body, and it creates disconnects from yourself as well. So firstly, with your body, right? If you your body's not a robot, right? It's not designed to, your body consumes 2,500 calories a day. Like, it's not a robot. It's going to fluctuate constantly based on so many things, right? Based on menstrual cycle for the ladies, based on immune system function, based on activity levels that you know are really subtle. Or maybe you're awake for a couple of hours longer that day, or, you know, there's so many things that come into play whereby your metabolism is going to be, you know, fluctuating. And so you might be on your menstrual cycle and all of a sudden experiencing some cravings, right? Your body wants more. Or you might have been awake for a particularly long period of time, or you might have changed your workout routine, and all of a sudden your workouts are way more intense, and your body's going, I need food. But when you have a rigid system, it basically teaches you, ignore what your body's telling you. Ignore your hunger, ignore your energy, ignore your cravings. You know what's best. You know what your body needs. Ignore what your body's telling you. Stick to the system at all costs. So it creates this disconnect. People no longer know how to respond to the fluctuations that they have in their appetite, the fluctuations that they have in physical cravings. Like most people, I would, I'm going to make a complete assumption, but I wouldn't mind betting that the majority of people listening to this right now probably are not that aware of the difference between whether they're physically hungry or emotionally hungry, right? That's a very common one. But even deeper than that is within physical hunger, understanding the difference between craving for fats versus craving for carbs. That is a genuine physical craving, right? It's not an emotional craving. It's like you're depleted. Most people aren't able to interpret those signals either. And the reason being is because they've spent so long ignoring what their body is telling them. And also there's other things that play into it as well, right? I mean, unhealthy lifestyles, eating lots of processed foods and stuff, that will create imbalances that mean that we can't, leptin resistance and, all of that kind of stuff that are going to affect appetite levels. So there's definitely other things that will play into it, but there's also an element of just purely psychology in terms of people just have disassociated from their body signals and they can't read them anymore. So that's something that we need to reteach people. And then there's another thing that traditional approaches to diet and nutrition will teach, which is the disconnect from yourself and your own ability to make your own decisions. Because again, life is full of gray areas. And when people have this like rigid dieting mentality, they get to a place where they need numbers, as in calories, or rules, or another human being to tell them what to do in every single eventuality of life. But life is full of gray areas. Right? There's countless situations where you're going to be caught in a less than ideal situation, where you don't have your regular options available, whether you're traveling or whether you're at a works function and you're overseas at a conference or whatever it might be. And maybe you go and meet your best friend for coffee and they've just ordered some carrot cake, and carrot cake's your favorite. And well, is it appropriate for me to just like have a taste of that? Like, is that okay? I don't know. Like, just people freak out because they want rigid rules for, right, when you're in this situation, do this, don't do that. And that's why when we're working with clients, we spend a lot of time helping them to make their own decisions so that they know why they're making decisions. So what we're doing is we're teaching them principles as opposed to rigid rules. And when you've got a set of principles, then you can apply those principles to the best of your ability when they're within your control. And when they're not, okay, great, you still make the best choice you can, being principles driven, but then you just move on, right? So now we're getting away from perfectionism. So this is one of the big things with nutrition, is that we need to get away from systems that only reinforce perfectionism. Now, perfectionism will be two prongs. There will definitely be an element of it's a learned behavior. It's one of the most common behaviors actually that we help our clients with. People get to, in its first instance, like the core behavior of perfectionism is built upon, I need to get everything perfect and look perfect so that nobody can judge or criticize me. So then people get to this place where they're constantly looking for what else is wrong, what else isn't good enough, where are the flaws, where are the inadequacies, what could people disagree with, what could people criticize in me, in my work, in what I'm doing. And so they're constantly looking for that. So that's definitely an emotional behavior that we help people to eliminate. But certain approaches will for sure exacerbate that. And a lot of approaches to nutrition will exacerbate those problems that are already there in the first place.
You said a load of amazing stuff there. And something that you taught me, so I did like a mentorship certification with you, is pre-qualifying clients, because a lot of them almost want somebody to control them, keep them strict, make them be good, be that person who does that. Whereas you're like, right, no, actually, we're here to do some deep work, which in some ways is harder than this kind of, right, you with that old way, you've got zero responsibility, zero ownership, and all of these things. With this new way, we're actually going to give you ownership, responsibility, because the time in which we work together needs to impact, you work with people for 8 weeks, it needs to impact the next 80 years. Like it has to be about the future. So is this something that's really important that people committed? Because we've got people who say, oh, it's not a good time, I've got these social events coming up, oh, it's summer, so it's very social. Then winter comes and it's too cold. So how are we qualifying people? How are we getting people to actually commit to this future? And can you work with everybody?
Great question. So freedom from binge and emotional eating is available to everybody. But the way that we work is that we don't work with everybody, because for some people, there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff they're going to need to do first. So, for example, if somebody hasn't had enough pain yet. And what that means is that, like you said, you need to be all in on doing this work. There's a great Henry Ford quote, which is, thinking is the hardest work there is, which is the probable reason why so few people engage in it. And it's so true. People will do anything to avoid thinking type work. People would rather do manual physical work than thinking type work. Or they would rather do the thinking type work that is already fully automated, like they can do it almost on autopilot. But in terms of, you know, that kind of psychological effort, it's the one that most people are the least willing and prepared to do. And so you've got to be prepared to do what it takes. And what it takes is what it takes. Now, that might sound somewhat obvious by you saying that, but I really want to hammer home the point that what it takes is not what's convenient. It's not what you can shoehorn into your already busy schedule. It's what it takes. Now, a big misconception with what it takes is, again, coming from the perfectionism mentality, which is, I need to drop everything and do only this one thing. So actually, a lot of people who struggle with perfectionism will struggle with like a campaign style approach to life, which is they'll go all in on work, then they'll go all in on a holiday, then they'll go all in on health and fitness, but they haven't actually established a lifestyle where they're able to sustain consistency long term. And so doing what it takes does not mean dropping everything else and not having work be too busy and too crazy, right? Doing what it takes means learning how to do this when work is busy, right? If you can only prioritize your health and fitness and nutrition and your well-being when work is easy and quiet, that's not sustainable. Like, what do you think that's going to lead to, right? We have to teach you how to be able to sustain this forever through the good and the bad, through the chaos, through the uncertainty, through the unpredictability, through the problems that life throws at you, right? This has to be something that is going to be consistent long term. So that's where we're coming at from this. So people need to be in a place where they're ready. They finally come to the conclusion, right, I finally realized that yet another diet and yet another training plan is not going to fix this. And they've had enough pain with that. Now, when I say enough pain, that doesn't mean to say that somebody doesn't, that somebody has to be hit rock bottom in order for them to finally commit to doing the real work that actually makes a difference. But what it means is that there has to be a significant gap between where they are now and where they want to be. And they have to be utterly and resolutely committed to doing what it takes to bridge that gap. So we will only work with people when they're in that place. And so that's one of the reasons why our program is by invite only. We have to talk to somebody first to make sure that they're in the right place. And so that's one of the big ones. But then there are others, like, you know, people have to take ownership. Like some people are in a phase of their life, and it's a phase, right? It's not an identity. It's not who you are. It doesn't define you. But some people are in a phase where they feel like, and they act more like a victim, in the sense of they feel hard done by and they feel like life's against them, and most of their dialogue is more in the realms of complaining about how difficult things are and justifying why things can't be done, as opposed to getting resourceful and doing what it takes to make things happen. And again, I want to doubly emphasize, that's not who you are, right? But, you know, for some people, all they need is nothing more than realizing that. I literally, one of my best mates from home, literally just before this interview, got off the phone or I was sending him some voice messages. So I don't have a quote coach client relationship with him, but that being said, he's definitely open to me being quite direct, so I can. Most of the time when you're dealing with friends and family, you can't be direct in the same way that you can with a client. But I literally just got off the phone with him talking about this very thing and talking about, look, dude, you've gotten addicted to the victim mentality, and none of this is coming from judgment. It's completely human, and every single human being on the planet, myself included, is going to have their fuck this shit moment when things don't go the way they want it to. Everybody, that's okay. Don't beat yourself up for that. But how long are you going to stay there? And for some people, just purely verbalizing that and the awareness of that helps them to go, wow, yeah, you know what? I'm sick and tired of playing the victim. I'm now going to get resourceful. Great. Now they're in a place where they're ready to actually do the work, as opposed to just wish that somebody could do it for them. So there are certain things that we look for, which is why, again, we need to make sure that we get on the phone to talk to somebody to make sure that they're in the right place. And if they're in the right place, that's when the magic happens.
Yeah, I've always said as a coach, like we're more of a facilitator of change. Like the change comes from people. And you mentioned there the victim mentality. Is there some sort of like, and I guess this goes to the survival brain. Is there some sort of like secondary gain from that? Like,
yeah, yeah, exactly. For those unfamiliar with the term, so secondary gain is a term used a lot in NLP, at least, whereby there is every behavior, even apparently destructive behaviors underneath it, have an unconscious benefit. And so there's definitely unconscious benefits to being a victim. And I'm trying to think of a way to kind of soften the blow, because and I really mean that, because again, I really don't want this to come from a place of somebody feeling judged, right? This is one of the key things in coaching, is that you can never coach somebody if you're judging them, or at least you're never going to elicit any change out of them. The whole time that you're judging somebody, you're not going to help them. And I want people to really truly get, none of this is coming from judgment. Again, like I prefaced earlier, this is just human behavior. It's not you. It's not who you are. It's just humanity. And I do this, you do this, everybody does this to varying degrees, right? It's just human nature to, again, like if something happens the way that you don't want it to, or that you weren't expecting, to have your fuck this shit moment, to throw the toys out of the pram, to, complain about it, to wish that it was different. That's normal. It's completely normal. But sometimes people learn to get rewarded for that behavior. So for example, if I, talk to the people around me about something that happened and I'm struggling with it, then they can sympathize. They can give me a lot of attention. They can, help to reassure me. And I can then start to interpret that attention as love. And it's amazing to have like loving and caring people in your life. But if that then becomes a pattern whereby you learn to use your pain to coerce connection out of other people, now it's just manipulation. And it's not pleasant to hear that. And it's not your fault if you've done that. Absolutely not. Right? It's not like you intentionally went out of your way to do this and like consciously made a choice to go, hey, I'm gonna use my pain to like get people to treat, like, no, like you didn't consciously choose to do that, but it's just an unconscious reward mechanism where you do a certain behavior, emotionally you become rewarded for that. And in neurology, the phrase is neurons that wire together, fire together. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Right. So if you fire the neuron of being in pain, or that it's not one neuron, but the neural network of being in emotional pain, and then the neural network of feeling connected with somebody, like, and those two things happen at the same time, then they just become associated in your brain. And so unconsciously, without even realizing that you're doing it, you'll start to do that. And then you get even more connection, especially if, people then start to, I don't really like labels like this, but for simplicity, trauma bonding, right? When people like bond over their trauma, like they talk about their pain, and then somebody else goes, oh yeah, me too. And they just get to reinforce like why each other are so like kind of hard done by. And but they're just enabling, if anything. And it's nice to, now I get why people are doing it. Like, again, but well, there's a number of reasons. One is the connection, but also another one is the reassurance that there's nothing wrong with me. Right? If I can reassure myself that other people are struggling with the same problem, that's like, then I get to feel like there's nothing wrong with me, which is absolutely true. There's nothing wrong with you. These are just habits. That's all it is. Just a psychological habit for how you've learned to meet your emotional needs. But it's definitely not powerful. It's definitely disempowering. It's not useful. But there's nothing wrong with that, quote unquote, right? There's nothing wrong with you. So once we realize that, then we can start to, move away from the victim mentality. But yeah, like you said, there's definitely benefits to it. If I can convince myself that, it's all too hard and I can't do it and I'm not good enough, and, life's against me anyway, so what's the point? Now I don't have to face my fears. I don't have to put myself on the line, take any risks. I don't have to put myself out there, and I don't have to do any hard work. I don't have to face the discomfort of personal growth. And so now I get to meet some of my emotional needs through feeling sorry for myself and feeling like a victim, and convincing myself that that's just the way things are and things are unfair and I can't do anything about it, without having to face my fears. So people get rewarded, emotionally rewarded for it. And yeah, again, hopefully this kind of awareness helps to shift people to a place where they're like, oh wow, yeah, you know what, if I'm honest with myself, I've been doing that, and there's nothing wrong with continuing to do that. You're not flawed, you're not broken, but there's definitely consequences to behavior. And so do you want to, you know, what does your life look like if you keep doing it that way? And then now we get to step into, you know what, I'm going to step into taking ownership. And that's not just like a one and done. It's not like, oh, and now I realize, okay, great, now I'm going to like consistently take ownership. Like you'll still get triggered by your behavior, but now you can commit to conditioning the new response, or reinforcing the identity of the version of you that you want to grow into, instead of who you used to be acting like.
And these neural pathways can be so strong that it almost feels overwhelming not to do the usual default programmed, if you'd like, behavior. And this kind of links us to the survival brain, and kind of what is the point of the survival brain, which probably the clue's in the title.
Yeah. Good question. So the survival brain, as the title suggests, is responsible for our survival. It's a very, very primitive part of the brain that evolved hundreds of millions of years prior to what we could, again, for simplicity, consider to be the intelligent part of our brain. So the intelligent part of our brain is the wrinkly gray matter on the outside of the brain, called the cortex. And that's the part of the brain that we use for logical thinking. It's the part of the brain that literally uses language, like we're talking right now. And that's how we analyze things and rationalize and use logic. But then the survival brain doesn't understand logic. It doesn't understand, it's not intelligent in that regard. Right? It doesn't operate off reasoning and logic. It purely operates off emotions and associations. And it's like, as the name suggests, it's designed to make you survive. So it's the part of the brain that controls the fight or flight response, fight, flight, or freeze. And it's very, very powerful, and it's very, very fast. And that's one of the important things about survival is speed, right? So, and people will often think about it in terms of living in the wild scenarios, which of course, are relevant. If you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, then you definitely don't want to be caught up in the slow thinking of the intelligent or quote conscious brain, right? The cortex, and that's one of the things that just has evolved to make this so powerful and automatic. So if we're all sitting in our cave and a saber-toothed tiger walks in, and I'm being quote clever about it, go, oh, that's interesting, there's a saber-toothed tiger that's walked in. Okay, what would be the best course of action? So like maybe you two, like you guys could try and like go around the back of it and like and then you go, shit, run, and without even thinking about what you're doing, you're already running. Right? Who's more likely to survive? You are. I'm going to get eaten, right? Whilst I'm being quite clever. So as amazing as the intelligent part of our brain is, it's kind of like a committee of old guys that sit around and debate and intellectualize and figure things out. And that definitely enables us to build some amazing things. You look at technology in society as it is today, like we've built some phenomenal stuff compared to when we were hunter-gatherers. So it's incredible, but it's not going to help you survive in that type of situation. But the survival brain is still 100% relevant today, right? You don't want to accidentally step into the road in front of an oncoming bus that you didn't see coming, and then you suddenly see it at the last minute. Right, in that moment, you don't want to be again caught up in the slow committee of old guys. You want to be jumping out of the way before you even realize what's happening. And so that's what the survival brain is for. So what the survival brain will do is it will create associations, and it will be driven by feelings. So if you like all feelings and emotions if we go back far enough, especially back to our hunter-gatherer days, have reasons, right? If you're sat around bored, then that's a great stimulus to get up and go and explore, which is pretty important for, finding food and foraging and staying alive, and so on. So your survival brain will interpret any unsettling feeling as a threat to be escaped. And again, it's not going to use logic. It's just purely going to go, oh, this doesn't feel nice. I need to get out. Right. So we've got the obvious ones like fear. So we're going to run away from fear, or we're going to one of the three: fight, flight, or freeze. But then any other emotion, we're going to build a response to. And so in the example of turning to food, binge or emotional eating, compulsive eating, if my survival brain, if I give my survival brain the experience of, I was under threat, as in I'm feeling any kind of unsettled emotion, whether I'm feeling stressed or overwhelmed from work, whether I'm feeling rejected from a relationship, or, getting singled out by my boss, or whether I'm feeling frustrated at not being able to figure out a problem, or whether I'm feeling bored, then the survival portion of my brain is going to want to try to move me away from that. And again, the severity of the emotion is going to amplify the response, but either way, I'm still going to look to escape it. So if my survival brain has the experience of, I was under threat, I then ate some food, and the threat then disappeared. Or maybe it doesn't disappear altogether, but it's certainly diminished. Amazing. This works as a survival response. Now, that doesn't make any logical sense. But again, the survival brain doesn't operate using logic, right? It's designed for speed. And so I was under threat, I ate some food, the threat disappeared. Awesome. This works. And so it gets encoded as a survival response. It's kind of like your brain stores this kind of like a piece of software that says that you need to binge in order to survive. And that conditioning process, for that to become kind of automated to the point where it almost feels like a part of you completely takes over, that requires two things. One is repetition, and the other one is the intensity of the emotion. The more intense the emotion, the less repetition is required. So if you just like you're at school, or you're doing some school homework and you're bored, so you reach for some food to distract yourself, right? You'll probably need more repetition than if you are growing up in a home where you feel unsafe, you feel scared. Like maybe your parents are fighting, or maybe your parents got divorced and then you've got a stepmom or a stepdad who doesn't really care about you. They're just tolerating you, and actually they're just unleashing on you a lot. And you feel scared, and you're young, you're a little kid. And then you turn to food, and you learn that food, whilst it doesn't make you feel safe, it enables you a moment of escape, right? So that conditioning process, it's going to require less repetition the greater the intensity of the emotions, both on the front end and the back end, right? So if the front end is, feeling scared, but on the back end, it might be things like feeling relaxed, then, the greater the intensity of those emotions, then the stronger that conditioning process. And then it eventually gets to a point where it becomes fully automated. And that's when, your survival brain's kind of taken over, and it feels like another part of you takes over.
I guess a big question really leading is, well, how do we build these new patterns? So we've got all of these kind of deeply rooted automatic reactions that, your kids are still going to be kids and get on your nerves. Your boss is still going to be your boss. There's going to be uncertainty left, right, and center. There's a lot of gray areas. We know fine well people try to use, whether it's numbers or rules, to regulate their behaviors. How are we, I guess, rewiring that survival mechanism?
Yeah, good question, and massive answer. so one is we have to start, we have to start speaking the language of the survivor brain. So a lot of people will be stuck in a place of, I'm intelligent and I'm hardworking and I'm driven. Why the hell can't I fix these issues? Well, it's because you're using the language of the conscious brain to try to rewire the survivor brain. Remember, the survivor brain doesn't understand logic. You can analyze your problems all you want. You're not going to analyze your way out of it. And so we need to start using emotions and associations to rewire it. And so we need to teach you how to respond to the urges and the cravings in a way that enables them to dissipate, as opposed to making it worse. And most of the methods that people turn to make it worse. So there's kind of three big picture. There's three things that we need to address. One is we need to teach people an approach to food that gets away from the perfectionism that we mentioned earlier. Now, food is like 1 to maybe 5% of the problem and the solution. Most people obsess over that and they think that's the be all and end all. But actually it's only a small element, but it's still a very important element, because following methods that are going to amplify perfectionism and the all or nothing mindset is definitely going to make things worse, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is addressing the surface level habit of binge and emotional eating, which is the kind of rewiring the survivor brain component. And that's where we need to train the survivor brain to respond in new ways using, like I said, the language it understands, using emotions and associations. And then the third component is making sure that people aren't stuck in survival mode and triggering their survivor brain 24/7. And the vast majority of people that we encounter are chronically stressed and overwhelmed. And probably 50% of those don't even realize it, because it's just become normal. Kind of like if somebody has been, dehydrated for years, or they haven't been sleeping adequately for years, and then you finally get them doing those things, like you finally get them drinking enough water and sleeping enough, and they go, oh my God, I feel superhuman. This is awesome. And you go, that's not superhuman. That's normal. Like, that's where you should have been this whole time. You were so far below normal and you didn't even realize it. And that's where so many people are at with their levels of stress and overwhelm. And when it comes to stress and overwhelm, it's so easy to put our focus on the external stuff. The boss, the work, the kids, all of these external pressures that we have. And I'm not denying that people are busy, right? All of our clients are busy, right? They all have successful careers. They're all doing well, either in corporate or in their own personal businesses. They often have a team that they're running that depend on them. And some of those people, probably about 50% of them, also have children and, young children. And so there's definitely a lot of responsibilities. But the reason for chronic stress and overwhelm that never seems to go away, and you keep convincing yourself, oh, the light's at the end of the tunnel and things are just so crazy right now, and I just need to get this next thing out of the way, but after that I'll have more time. And then there's another thing, and then there's another thing, and you look back and you go, you know what, I've been in that kind of state on and off for the last 10 years. The reason for that is not the external stuff. It's all of the internal stuff that people are doing. Low self-worth, low self-esteem, imposter syndrome, struggling with issues around not feeling good enough, perfectionism, over-analyzing and overthinking, monkey mind, brains constantly jumping from one thing to the next, They're never able to be fully present. Rumination, constantly ruminating over stuff, whether it's a conversation they just had 5 minutes ago or something that happened decades ago. Or worry, chronic worry. Again, whether it's long-term, like chronically worrying about, future stuff, and my kid's going to be okay, that kind of stuff, or whether it's shorter-term stuff like the to-do list, worrying about everything else that needs to get done that day. And oh my God, like, am I going to be able to get it all in and fit it all in? And am I like, blah, blah, blah. And people pleasing and negative body image, right? These types of things are just causing people to trigger their survival brain 24/7. They're just constantly stressed and overwhelmed. And a lot of the time it's like this kind of low level anxiety that's just kind of bubbling away in the background. And again, because Firstly, because they've been doing it for so long, it's just become normal. And for some people, they almost get a weird sense of pride out of how stressed they are. And they might not like it, but again, it gives them significance. It gives them a sense of significance, right? It can meet some of their emotional needs. And so they get to feel valuable because they're always busy and they're always doing stuff. Some people will even compete on how busy and stressed they are. Like you go into some corporate environments, go into any law firm, and you will see people competing on who's had the least sleep and who's got the highest workload, right? And so, you know, that can only add fuel to the fire, because if now you value, like you actually, like, again, secondary gain, there's some kind of like hidden emotional benefit to being stressed. And so, you know, people get into these like into cycles. And so we need to make sure that we're addressing the deeper stuff as well, because sometimes people will ask the question, okay, well, like just purely in terms of the surface level habit of binge eating or emotional eating or compulsive eating, whatever label you use, like, could I just do that? Like, is that all I need? And well, the analogy is kind of like asking somebody to overcome their addiction to painkillers whilst leaving them in physical pain 24/7. It's like, yeah, but you're making life like a hell of a lot harder for yourself. And the majority of people are just going to go straight back into survival mode, right? Because one of the things about the survival brain is that it does not care about long-term consequences. This is why people are constantly deferring what they say they want. Right? They wake up in the morning and they go, oh my God, why did I do this to myself yet again? Well, now you're able to look at the big picture consequences. But in the moment, if you think about what the survival brain is designed to do, when a saber-toothed tiger walks into your cave, it's not going to be a great survival response to go, what am I going to do tomorrow? Sheila from the neighboring tribe, she's hot. Like, I wonder if I can work my way in there with her and, you know, maybe mate and have some cavemen and women babies. Like, you know, you're not thinking about that at that point. You like, your brain just goes, shit, get out. Right. So the survival brain is designed to cut off anything that's long term. You're not thinking long term. You don't care about the long term consequences of having a binge. That's one of the reasons why people constantly do it. They're not connected to what are the long term implications of having a binge. They're just purely driven by, I need to feel better now. That's all they're being driven by. And so that's why, like I say, it's important that we deal with the deeper stuff, because again, using the analogy, it's kind of like asking somebody to overcome their addiction to painkillers and leaving them in physical pain. They're probably just going to go into survival mode and go, I just need to feel better right now, because it's exhausting to live in that place. So those are kind of the three kind of main components that we need.
Awesome. No, that's really, really, really good, man. And like, I'm sure the people that are listening have taken a huge amount of incredible value. You know, having and being as transparent as me is like, you know, I worked with David and Rachel, and I think I had like a little bit of a wobble because of just how challenging the real work is, because we can get lost off in all of this kind of surface level stuff. There's a lot of kind of this evidence-based culture going around that are trying to intellectualize the way through these quite primitive issues, because it's all well and good, but as soon as people actually start being adults, you know, children, careers, mortgages, all of these sorts of things, like, and those old systems don't work anymore. They've been maybe taught one thing. Instead, what we're trying to do is give people options and flexibility and the ability to navigate and move the goalposts and not be on a diet, but have a diet. And what does that diet look like to that individual is going to be very different, and their interpretation of that kind of, we want to basically minimize and eliminate any perceived restriction or friction there. So like I owe David and Rachel a huge thank you. That at the time was very hard for me, but here we are 2-3 years later. It's allowed me to explore myself a lot more, which inevitably has made me a better coach, a better father, a better, husband, better everything. So you don't realize that sometimes the work that you do within that 8-week period with yourself, or the 12-week period with myself, how that's just setting some small, subtle, things like, I call it planting seeds, and what that eventually will grow into, and what paths that might lead you down in the future, instead of just trying to do the easy work, which is brushing everything under the carpet and hoping it works, which inevitably it never does. So I just wanted to extend that thank you to you and Rachel, and I will be inviting Rachel onto the podcast in the future. But yeah, again, a big thank you for that.
Oh, it's a big pleasure. Thank you very much for your very kind words. And yeah, I agree. That's where coaching comes in, and we're not ignoring the science, and we're not going against the science. Why would you do that? Why would you go against what science has, irrefutably proven? And for sure, there are things that are being explored in science, and it might be early days. So it's things might suggest that this is a thing, but we need more research, right? That's something that a lot of researchers will say, is that we need more research. But there are also other things that are, very very well established and very accepted. Like, why would you go against those things? But there's a huge difference between understanding the science versus coaching. Like, coaching is about getting people to do the thing. And one of the big things is complexity is the enemy of execution. The more complicated something is, the less likely somebody is going to be able to do it. And so, would you rather have a simpler system that somebody's actually going to follow? And here's the thing, is that for the vast majority of people's results, the solution is so simple. Like, you really don't need to be going complex. And it's only really, elite athletes and people going for real extremes that need more complex solutions. But somebody who wants to be lean, fit, and healthy year round, and run a successful business and have a big corporate career and have a family too at the same time, they can achieve all of those goals with a simple approach. And that's where the art of coaching comes in, because some people will. I hesitate to say this, but let's call a spade a spade. Some people will hide behind the science because they'll go, right, here's the evidence-based approach. If you can't make yourself do that, then you just don't want it badly enough. And they'll try and almost put it back onto the client as to being lazy or uncommitted or indecisive or uncoachable. And now I don't have to grow as a coach. But if, as a coach, I take 100% responsibility, now this goes into relationship coaching, actually. So, and for any relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship with your husband or wife, or a client coach relationship, is most people see it as 50-50. All right. Now, if you think about the relationship that you have with your wife, or the relationship that you have with your son, if you see that as 50-50, then that gives you a lot of scope to blame the other person. But if you take 100% responsibility, you're not going to blame them. So how does that play into a coaching relationship? Well, I fully recognize that I can't be more committed to somebody's dream than they are. Hence all of the stuff we mentioned earlier about, we need to qualify people and make sure that they're in the right place. But if I'm working with somebody, I'm going to take 100% responsibility, which means that if they're struggling, I'm going to bend over backwards and leave no stone unturned for figuring out, what does that person need for the breakthrough? Of course, I'm going to, get better results than somebody who doesn't really want to do that thinking work again. Thinking is the hardest work there is. and just kind of hide behind their method and say, well, my method's the best and my method works. And if you're not doing it, then that's on you. You're bad students. Right. And again, that's where the art of coaching comes in, that's what bridges that. It's coaches that take stuff that is proven in science and they figure out, how do I get people to implement this in real life? Because there's a big difference between learning and studying something in a laboratory setting or in a controlled case study versus real people in the real world. And so let's take what we know, but how do we get those outcomes, but in real people in the real world? And that's what coaching is all about, which is why it's kind of both an art and a science. Really.
Yeah, and that's why you said earlier about it being 1 to 5% of the results, because without the 95%, without the underlying things, it just becomes another perceived diet, another external thing. Whereas the change that we really need to do is the internal work, the hard work, which it's the payoff in the long run. It's like the investment loan. It's like, right, upfront, yes, it costs you this, but it's going to only just grow and grow and grow. And then a lot of people are scared with that short-term investment, I guess, because people understand systems and they understand people like have done it. So there's that perceived like results, where in some sort of way what we do is, so like it's like putting a full ownership and responsibility on them. And there might be that lack of trust in themselves because every diet they've tried in the past has failed. Why should this next one be different?
Yeah, it's a big concern for a lot of people. And one of the things that I frequently point out to people is, of course, nothing worked for you in the past. So first of all, even if we just look at nutrition on its own, you might think that what you were following was, a smart approach, a scientific approach and stuff. But as we've already established at the start of this episode, that most of what people are following is actually making their relationship with food worse, not better. And it's not their fault. They don't know. But so that's nutrition on its own. But even then, even if we gave you like a really smart, simple, healthy, sustainable, personalized approach to nutrition, that's still not going to fix your problems anyway. Because the real reason why you're struggling is all of the quote unquote fuck it moments, as we like to say in Chase Life. Right? It's all of the fuck it moments that are causing people to struggle. You're not going to solve those with a different approach to nutrition. It's the end of a long, busy day. You're exhausted, you're burnt out, you desperately want a sense of release. Or, just this once, or this is the last time, or, I can't be bothered to, justify my behavior to my mum, my colleagues, my friends yet again. I'll just do what they're doing. And all of these different moments, none of that's got anything to do with nutrition. It's all emotions and behaviors. And so, of course, nothing worked for you in the past. That says nothing about you or your capabilities or your future. It says everything about the methods that you've been trying so far. So let it go. Of course you can do this. But you just haven't even gotten close to a real solution that actually works.
Yeah, and this is what this podcast is all about. It's about just exploration and seeing things completely different. And I'm so aware of the time, David, and you've been super kind. So what I'm sure will happen down the line, because there's just so many segues we could go down, is I will definitely bring you on if that's okay with you. I'm just making assumptions there, but just so people can find you, I've mentioned the podcast, but do you want to just tell everybody where they can go to find yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is chaselifeconsulting.com. You can find Rachel on Instagram at Athletic Fox. You can find myself at DX Godfrey. That's Godfrey. And then we've got the podcast. The podcast is one of the best places, especially if somebody's already listened to this, then they obviously already consume podcasts. So yeah, we are up to episode 68 now, I think. So episode 69 is obviously going to be on relationships.
Of course.
Coming up. But yeah, so the which is the Chase Life podcast, available on the usual platforms. And yeah, those are the main places for somebody to connect with us.
Well, David, I've thoroughly enjoyed that today. I just want to say a big thank you on behalf of myself and the listeners. Everybody, make sure you go, subscribe to that podcast again. It's absolutely amazing. And again, thank you for everything that you do and continue to do.
My pleasure, Ian. Thanks for having me on.